Howdy, guys, gals, and non binary pals. This is the Tales from the Waystone Summer Reading Program.
We are your hosts, Will and Phoenix. Let's get into it.
Welcome to the fourth installment of our series on Becky Chambers' The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. Mind the Ketlings, where we'll be reading pages 191 through 246.
As a reminder for all of you who already know the spiel, and for those who may be new here, a little bit of an explanation of the pod. Each week, we will be examining a section of The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, figuring out what we can take from the text and apply to our real lives. We will also take time to focus on our news of the week and share a recommended thing of the week. Finally, we'll wrap things up with some words from the book and some words from our own lives. Before we begin, let's get some disclaimers out of the way. First of all, we are in no way affiliated with Becky Chambers or her publisher, Harper Voyager. Secondly, our discussions naturally assume that you have read the amount of the book that we are currently going through and over and all that stuff, and probably the entire book because we know the whole thing. And spoilers. Also, a word to our community: please be kind to yourselves, one another, and the creators of the worlds that we love exploring.
All right. Well, with that out of the way, let's jump in to our first chapter, Cricket.
Cricket, the name of a moon that is covered in bugs.
It reminds me a lot of cicada swarms.
Yeah, except ginormous.
Yes, if cicadas were like 6 feet long.
If cicadas were the size of a VW bus.
Yeah. So we begin basically with the crew still a little bit traumatized after that encounter with the Akarak.
Kizzy especially winds up with some pretty gnarly PTSD, I think.
And, the whole crew is starting to feel like they need to have some defenses.
Like Ashby ever holding to his culture, to his upbringing, to his beliefs, to what have you, is still anti-gun, which I think is a really particular worldview being shared by Becky Chambers.
And that doesn't mean he refuses to have a passive defense, though.
No, but he is anti-violence, especially anti-violence perpetrated by himself or those that are under his care. And I think in terms of real world people, it takes a very particular type of person to hold to those principles when faced with the reality that people who are intent on violence don't give half a
Shirt.
about whether their intended victims and or opponents intend violence.
Yeah, I'm kind of reminded of the Mennonites here on Earth who are devout pacifists and, in generally a fairly non judgmental way. Like Ashby himself is a pacifist, but we know for a fact that he is friends with people who are not.
He is with someone who is not.
Correct. And, you get the sense that his commitment to trying to find peaceful solutions to problems, like it's not a guarantee of success, right? It's not a guarantee of safety, but it does tend to de-escalate situations and it solves more problems than it causes.
Right, to a point. I admire the commitment and I wish that the entirety of everyone could be that committed to not cause harm to others. But I also know that there are people who will take advantage of that in a heartbeat.
Oh, absolutely. And again, I think this is why Ashby is okay with installing some passive defenses on the ship, in this case, in the form of a shield grid.
One last little bit. So I watch a lot of YouTube reaction videos from people in the UK. As someone who lives in the United States, gun violence and the threat of there being a gun at like a ER or, someplace that is a place of healing, like the people who work there have to be wary of people with or without a gun permit, right? Like they could just very easily be the victims of gun violence themselves. And in the UK, they have to look out for knives. Like, honestly, can also cause serious damage, but not as quickly or as far reaching. But that's not to downplay their danger. And so, yeah, in this case, Ashby, who is anti tools of violence, understands that his crew no longer feels safe. And yeah, there are defenses that he could purchase, like shield grids. I'm not sure, though, that that's specifically enough to allay those fears. And I think therapy and other ways to address it are warranted. But I do, again, applaud the impulse towards nonviolence.
I'll also say that Ashby probably wouldn't disagree with you on the whole therapy thing. I think it is also just him recognizing that as a practical matter, given that they're going to be traveling through some dangerous territory, even in scenarios where they don't encounter any malice, having a good shield grid might be useful for dealing with things like asteroid fields and space debris and things like that.
And also, as someone who has definitely read more science fiction stuff than just this, that's a little more, I'd say, hard science fiction, the knowledge that no matter how strong your hull is, little itty bitty tiny bits of space debris can rip through things much easier than medium sized space debris. And I would question any actual spacefaring vessel of any sort that didn't have some kind of shielding.
And, to be fair to Ashby, this is the first time he's actually had a job that's paid enough that would actually fund that sort of upgrade on his ship.
True. In this particular setting, it's not a danger of random stuff in space, it's a danger of malicious people in space.
So, anyway, let's talk a little bit about this planet, or more accurately, moon, where they land. So, this is a moon called Cricket. It's fairly sparsely inhabited, and they're there because Kizzy and Jenks have a couple friends who are hardcore modders and hardware geniuses who could probably hook them up with a good shield grid.
When we're saying modders in this universe, think the Winter Soldier, think robotic parts, cybernetics that enhance or replace existing things like eyes or arms or other body parts. That's what the modder community mostly works on. Also, other tech.
So, their contact is a guy named Bear.
His name's actually Teddy, which is funny.
What's also really funny to me is everyone's like, what's a bear?
Yeah, that too.
Because remember, this is a post terrestrial humanity, and the concept of a bear, this is something that nobody in the human race has seen probably for hundreds, if not thousands of years at this point.
I don't know. Do you think that bears still exist on Earth? Because there is fauna.
There might be, but I mean, the human population there is so sparse at this point and primitive.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if anyone knows what a bear is, or if just the crew doesn't know what a bear is.
They probably have seen pictures of them. I kind of figure, like, at this point, bears would be to humans the way dragons are to us right now.
I almost think that because it's so endearing with the teddy bear thing, it is possible that teddy bears, like plushies, might be artifacts from a long gone era, and some might have survived.
And I bet you they probably still make recreation teddy bears, even though no one has seen a bear, like I say, for a long time.
And teddy bears look nothing like bears. Anyway,
Yeah.
not real bears.
I mean, they look a little bit like a real bear, like the face does.
Depends on how realistic your teddy bear is, I guess.
But anyway, Bear is much like his nickname, large and hairy, with a giant cybernetic arm. That part's not like an actual bear.
That would be very frightening, especially if it were a polar bear.
It's clear that he has a great deal of affection for both Kizzy and Jenks. They've known each other for a while, and he welcomes them with open arms, quite literally, with a great big bear hug.
Go figure.
And so the whole crew piles into his skiff to take off to head back to his homestead. I mean, if you've ever been in that scenario where you have a group of people and then the car that's picking you up has technically enough seats, like it has enough seat belts.
But one of them might, like, the seats might be a bench seat in the front that really should only have two people because there is a center console. or someone has to sit on someone's lap, or the person with a tail winds up having it fall asleep in the middle of the trip.
It makes some assumptions about a very small size of the average passenger that maybe isn't true.
Yes,
Let's talk a little bit about Nib, the other brother in this pair of modders. He's a little more reserved than Bear. Bear is gregarious and outgoing, and Nib is a lot more reserved, a little bit sarcastic.
thoughtful,
Yeah,
paternal.
he clearly is the one who is trying to make sure that everyone's doing the right thing.
Where I actually see Bear trying to be more inclusive.
Yeah, there's an interesting bit where Nib and Jenks have sort of a fairly razzy exchange with one another. And Nib cracks a joke about Jenks's height, and then Jenks fires back with a joke about a missing eye.
And how it happened. I highly recommend people just read the book because I think we're doing this and the humor and everything a little bit of a disservice.
I guess the point I'm getting at is we learn a couple things in that interaction. First, this is one of the few people that Jenks is actually okay with making that kind of joke.
It's kind of like you can make a joke about your brother, but if anyone else makes a joke about your brother, you're going to punch him in the face.
And it's also the sort of thing where it's clear that the root of it is genuine affection between the two, even though Bear is not quite comfortable with this.
It is odd sometimes being the person on the outside of the inside joke because sometimes those inside jokes are only okay, again, within that very small capsule of like familiarity, where not only would you not accept another person making that joke, the other person might be uncomfortable with that joke. So, one of the ways that this has happened in my life or my experience is when people who are a different race than I am make a joke that you can only make if you are the race of the people that you are joking about. I guess in some cases, like I could do that about non-binary and or trans people, but if somebody who was cis and straight and didn't know, wasn't part of the community, tried to make that joke, it would probably not go over well.
I mean, it's also the sort of thing where, like, I can make little jokes to you and about you, to your face specifically. Again, I can tease you about liking frogs.
Even if that's not actually true. Because I'm non binary, there is a weird thing about having a frog in your pocket. Anyway,
I can give you a gentle little tease about that.
garlic bread.
Yeah. And at the same time, I also know that I can make that joke to you, but that doesn't mean I can make that joke to anybody.
Right. You can't necessarily make that joke to all non binary people.
It also doesn't necessarily make it okay for me to make that joke to you in front of just some random other non binary person.
Or some random other cis person.
Right. Because they might also feel uncomfortable about it. Like, the thing is, private jokes are private jokes, which means they're private. And not everyone is strictly comfortable with them. And we learn that Bear is not comfortable with showing affection through joshing.
Through mean spirited joking.
Even if I don't think it's particularly mean spirited, but it is a little bit
uncomfortable.
We learn a couple other interesting things about Nib over the course of this chapter. And I think some things that are actually pretty important for Rosemary in particular. He is an archivist. So, yeah, he's out here on this weird frontier backwater. And at the same time, he is someone who takes responsibility for making sure that information out on the, for lack of a better word, internet is accurate.
He's ground news.
He's a Wikipedia editor, actually, is what I was thinking. Like, because he does it on a volunteer basis. He takes it upon himself to edit the information articles in his particular field of specialty, which is current events.
But also that requires being able to sift through the political
bullshit
that is current events.
And, he believes that this is an incredibly important thing to do. And, he earns Rosemary's respect with this. At first, she's a little bit uncomfortable because I think Rosemary is always a little bit uncomfortable for a couple of reasons. One, she's never really been out in the open.
She's very sheltered, I would say.
I agree with that. I think the other thing is she is someone who has very recently had the one thing that was giving her a sense of stability ripped from her. So let's get into that particular aspect of Rosemary, because I think this is where we've got some real meat on the bone to pick over.
So when I first read this story, clearly, there is something that Rosemary is keeping from not only her fellows, but that the book is keeping from the audience about her. And I honestly figured that because of the hiding of one's identity, hiding of one's past, like how she addressed her name, how she addressed certain things about her family, it feels very transcoded. It's not, but it felt very much like someone who was hiding in the closet or had transitioned but was hiding their past or the reality that they are trans. It felt very much like, yeah, Rosemary is my name. I changed all of the stuff on the official documents to make sure that it matched who I am now. I don't want to tell people about my past. I don't want to tell people about who I was before for fear that people would ostracize me. And it felt very much like a trans story until we find out that the reason that all this is happening is because her father was kind of a CEO of a fuel company and was also a back channel weapons dealer, selling weapons of very like high violent potential to both sides of a war.
So, and let's talk a little bit about that. So, he was selling gene targeters, so weapons that would target specific genetic lineages, and he was selling them to the Teremi. Now, remember, the Teremi Ka, one of the factions in that war, are the ones that just recently joined the GC and are the whole reason why Ashby and the crew are on this mission in the first place. And the reason why this is important is there is a vast store of ambi-cells at the center of the galaxy where the Teremi live. And so, in opening up this particular area to the rest of the galaxy, it's basically a gold rush. And Quentin Harris III, Rosemary's father, wanted to be a part of that. And he was selling weapons on the black market to both sides of this conflict in an effort to get access to these reserves of ambi cells.
To increase his wealth, to continue to increase his wealth well past need, well past want, into just levels that are, in my mind, disgusting because I don't think billionaires should exist.
And I think this is also the difference between Solon society versus the Exodans.
Greed?
The Exodans have had to put that aside. They have had to rely on mutual aid and cooperation, and they took to the stars out of desperation, out of a need to survive. So they did away with
They flattened their economic strata
exactly. Whereas the Solons left Earth for ambition, for conquest,
for money.
for money. It's the difference between leaving because you have nowhere else to go and leaving because you want to go exploit somewhere else. It's something that when the crew sees the news report about Quentin Harris's sentencing,
Not knowing that Quentin Harris is Rosemary's father.
they have a very harsh reaction to it. And Rosemary does too. So let's clear the air here. First of all, she is absolutely horrified by what her father did, and she had no knowledge about it until he was arrested.
Had nothing to do with it.
This is why she fled. This is why she changed her name.
This is why she spent nearly all of her money just getting off of Mars, getting away from her family, getting away from her former life.
She's worried that if she couldn't see the evil that he'd done, that she was also somehow infected by it.
She's also worried that anyone encountering her will tar her with the same brush.
So when, Jinx notices that Rosemary's in distress, he goes to ask her what's going on, and Rosemary finally breaks down and tells him,
Everything.
everything. And Jinx's first question and his only question is, and you didn't have anything to do with it, right? And when she says, No, not at all.
He's like, then what's the problem?
Right. He quickly recognizes, hey, look, you didn't do that.
You were not your father. And then her understandable reaction is, I'm still going to be hated because I hid this.
Jinx says, look, Ashby's not going to be happy that you hid this from him, but he'll be glad that you told him.
There's no parallels whatsoever there.
Then he says, you need to have a talk with Dr. Chef, one-on-one.
This section.
Yeah. So Dr. Chef, I think, has some real wonderful words of wisdom.
Before we get to that, I just want to cover one last thing before we leave Cricket. And that's, while the brothers do understand Ashby's desire to be a pacifist and not to have weapons, it doesn't stop them from trying a soft sell. Yes, they're more than happy to make a custom shield grid defense system for the ship, but they also dangle, quite literally, weapons in front of Ashby and his crew, and some of his crew like target practice. All I'm going to say, but I think, should go back to the bigger discussion. I don't want to be overly bit by bit. I think everyone should read this story, and there are things we're leaving out. But I think that the bit with Dr. Chef is capital I important.
Yeah. So just a little bit about Dr. Chef as a refresher for everyone. So he's a Grum, which is a relatively rare species in the galaxy.
There's like 300 of them.
And we know that he is, like his name says, both a doctor and a chef. He sees these two things as basically being the same thing.
Nourishing.
Exactly. His job is to take care of people's bodies and their minds and their well-being. And he's this incredibly life-giving character. But there's also a sadness at his heart. And so when Rosemary goes to talk with him after they get back from Cricket, Dr. Chef opens up to her about his past. So the Grum are a species that were caught in a vicious, generations-long civil war. A civil war that had been going on so long that neither side could really remember why it had started or what the inciting event was. They were just convinced that the other side had to die.
Along the way, they made tech that escalated the violence.
So in this time, Dr. Chef was working as a combat medic. His job was to triage battlefield injuries, save who he could, and then euthanize the ones he couldn't. He did not have time to really nourish and truly heal his patients.
He also didn't have time to stay well informed, because when you're just going and going and going and going, you can't stop to investigate. And it doesn't matter what the specifics are, but what does matter is that there was a piece of tech created that wound up being a extremely painful and destructive way to die, that was used specifically by the people on the opposite side of the war to Dr. Chef. And later on, he finds out that it's not just that they were using it, they had stolen the tech from his side. His side came up with it. And so now he's with this moral quandary of no side is good. There isn't a good guy in this whole thing. I'm not a good guy.
And it's compounded when his last daughter is hit by one of these weapons.
Now, it's important also to know that the Grum, in their gender fluidity, they start off female and grow up and transition male as they grow up. Like, this is just how their species is. So every person is somebody's daughter in that war. They're all female until they hit a certain age, and then they transition to male. And most never reached an age where they did, and many never reached an age where they procreated.
So with the death of Dr. Chef's family at this point, his entire family is gone. He pretty much breaks.
He's disillusioned. And we're doing something that's actually important with the pronouns. When you are speaking of someone who is trans and has transitioned and whose pronouns are what they are now, you don't go back and use their former pronouns, you use their current pronouns, if you know them, to the person's preference. If they say otherwise, it's otherwise.
So Dr. Chef breaks, and He manages to hitch a ride on a trading ship that passes through. And while he's on this ship, the ship's cook takes him under his wing. And we find that Dr. Chef finds something that he actually appreciates doing, something that lets him take care of people, lets him heal them, lets him nourish them, lets him provide the kind of care that he was never able to provide any of his own people. So when he arrives at Port Coriol, he befriends someone who is running a soup stand and starts learning about spices and seasoning, starts really taking an interest because soup is something that is nourishing and cheap and that anyone can afford. So, point is, Dr. Chef knows something about feeling complicit in acts of evil and things that he didn't know about. And it's over time through the choices that he makes that he's able to find some sense of peace and absolution for what happened. So, Rosemary asks, I mean, that's a whole different scale from what I'm dealing with. And I think Dr. Chef's remark of, I know it's not the same, and I know it's different scales. It's a different experience and it's a different degree, but it is a basis for which I can use to build empathy.
This is something I do want to talk about.
And that's exactly what I was getting at too. I think we're on the same page here. And I think this is where your earlier insight of, oh, hey, is this something that's maybe kind of transcoded comes back. It is maybe not directly, but that doesn't mean, the having a trans experience can't give you some empathy and insight into Rosemary's feelings. And I think when we talk about empathy in general, it oftentimes relies on us having to think back to imperfect analogs, things that aren't direct one to ones, but can at least give us a basis to start thinking in that way. We don't have to have a perfect understanding of what it's like for someone to experience something to look into our own pasts and find something close enough to start us thinking about it.
One of the things that I was going to talk about is that for a lot of neurodivergent people, a way we show empathy is to find something that is an analog in our past and show, hey, I've gone through something like this. Because I've gone through something like this, I can empathize with what you're going through. And an odd experience that I've had is that a neurotypical audience hates it when you do that because they always, not always, like I don't want to attribute this to every person, but they feel like a lot of the times you're having an oppression Olympics. Well, you had this, so I had it worse, so mine is worse. And mine deserves more whatever than yours does. Mine deserves more care than yours does. Mine deserves blah, 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 blah. And that's not what most of us who are trying to empathize in that way are getting to. We're saying, hey, I can feel something similar in my past and I empathize with you and I'm here with you. It's not about one-upmanship. It's not about trying to say which one's worse or which one deserves more care, pity, attention, something. It's saying I understand because I've gone through something similar. And what I like from Dr. Chef here is that he's saying, yeah, they're different degrees, but they still both matter. They're still both valid feelings. I also had a recent experience. The only social media that I really am on is Reddit. And I'm currently doing the thing that my anxious brain does, which is research the crap out of something that's going to come up, which is for me a surgery, which will be both gender affirming and also like hopefully pain relieving. And someone in that subreddit, they were like, so having a hysterectomy is a thing that I'm worried that it'll make me feel like less of a woman. And I countered with, a lot of people do get them for gender affirming reasons. It makes them feel better to have it gone. But I think it would do you some good to decouple your body parts from your gender. And a lot of non-binary and trans people can almost certainly empathize with your need to do that, even if it's the opposite way. What does removal of organs that are so tied to gender make me after I do it? Well, for some people, it's very affirming and now you don't have to deal with that. For some people, it's very dysphoria inducing because now you're questioning your purpose. And I'm like, your purpose isn't your body parts, but I don't want to be mean to you. And so I'm coming at it from a side of, I think a lot of us can sympathize or empathize with how this is a mind trip rather than the exact way you feel.
I think empathy is built on imperfect analogs and acknowledging those imperfections. And it's okay. It doesn't make you less empathetic to have not the exact same experiences as someone else because no one's had the exact same experiences as anyone else.
I would also say, though, that maybe it is because I'm neurodivergent. I do prefer people empathizing with me by telling me their stories.
I think it's that sharing, that fellowship, and that vulnerability that Rosemary responds to. Dr. Chef reminds her and us that our morality is built on our choices, not based on our histories. Like if we look at Rosemary's case, she did the best she could with what she knew at the time when she was a kid, and as she was growing up. And then when she knew better, she did better.
That's also a huge thing when you know better and you do better, because not everyone does that. In fact, actually, there are a lot of examples, same deal, like talking with strangers, of trying to just gently remind people, hey, people outside your experience exist. And I've had both, oh, right, my bad, I'm sorry, I forgot to include like an entire group of people that are affected by this. And I've also had people who then go on to politicize my existence and yell at me because they think I'm politicizing my identity because I exist.
I think that reminder, though, that we can only ever make the choices that are in front of us, and we make the decisions as best we can based on what we've got. As we know more, we do better. And if we're committed to that and to holding ourselves accountable, there isn't a whole lot of room for anyone to really legitimately complain. So Dr. Chef helps Rosemary to have the grace for herself that she needs. She's been carrying around her past like this great big ball of guilt for things that she had no control over, no agency over.
That she didn't even do.
Right. I mean, she felt guilty for her family's privilege. She felt guilty for the things that she learned from her father, for having a comfortable upbringing.
And that's the thing, though. I don't think that it is incumbent on people who have privilege to feel guilty for growing up with privilege. I think it is incumbent upon people who have privilege to acknowledge that privilege and strive to help people without it have the same opportunities.
Exactly. And so Rosemary is going through a journey here, trying to learn more about the world outside of her, trying to learn more about the people around her. And she's trying to find a new community that she can fit into. And slowly but surely, I think she's starting to find out that the Wayfarer is a community like that, where she can feel safe.
I think it's time to move on to the last kind of vignette that we are covering. We do kind of split this one between this episode and next time's episode. Just a heads up.
So let's dive into Kedrium Part 1. So we start with a little bit more about Kizzy.
She is going through it. Much like a lot of people who have ADHD, she doesn't go to sleep at what a lot of people would consider normal times. And she has a kind of delayed sleep time regardless. Always has. Her mind races at night. When she finally lets herself relax, her mind just goes. It's like those little pullback cars and you just let it go. And this happens as soon as she's supposed to be going to sleep, according to other people.
And it's been like this since she was a kid.
Right. That's important to note. And she's tried to find ways to cope with it that allow her to be part of other social groups. But right now, after her experience with the Akarak, after the ship's experience, she's afraid to go to sleep. And I've had things like this where my anxiety just kept me from being able to go to sleep or kept me from having good sleep. When I was a kid, I was incredibly afraid of fire, like very afraid that my home would burn down, afraid of fire, with me in it, afraid of fire. And I remember at my elementary school, the fire department would bring this little fake house that you had to climb up a ladder and go through all this stuff and do all these things very fast and then climb down a rope or jump off of or something into somebody's safe arms or like you would be fine. everything was safe and it was probably no more than 5 feet off the ground, but I was a kid and it was taller than me. And every time I knew that that thing was going to come to my elementary school, it scared the living
Shirt.
out of me and I couldn't sleep. Combine that then with something like PTSD, where instead of it being anxiety for something coming up, it's anxiety about reliving a thing that was traumatic over and over again. And flashbacks are not memories. Flashbacks are you are in it. It's a sensory thing. I have flashbacks that don't make sense to other people and they seem like they should be innocuous memories. Example, I recently put on a flannel shirt to go outside and we were going to go play badminton together and just kind of exercise in that way. And, these are things that are fun activities for me and you. And then I go to put on a flannel shirt and roll my sleeves up. And I remember discussions and my control being taken away and someone else doing it for me because he knew how to do it better than I could, even if it was a thing where he cared more about whether or not they stayed up than I did. And it was a control thing. Having someone else help you with things like I have memories of my dad helping me put tights on, and that's not a traumatic experience, but I have memories of that other person putting my sleeves up and I can feel how tight it was against my bicep. And I can feel how much I hated it when he did it because it was infantilizing and because it was a loss of my own control over my own stuff. And so that's also a thing that Kizzy is going through, is this lack of control over the situation. She couldn't do anything. She wants to have control over what would have happened. She wants to be, as we said before, John McClane going through the pipes and air ducts and making sure that she's out of the way, but she can ambush the people that are trying to hurt her friends. And this is why she's awake when the ship gets a distress call from another ship, which immediately freaks her out.
So when she takes the call, she discovers that it's an Aluan combat freighter.
And it's Pay.
And this changes things a little bit for Kizzy as soon as she realizes who this is.
She has just the most emotional whiplash experience ever because she goes from being scared out of her dang mind to being like, oh.
And so she goes from being afraid to then excited to figuring out, oh, this is going to be so much fun to tell Ashby. He's going to freak out.
And so she's even just like, Lovey, I want to wake Ashby up. And it's almost like that tractor kind of waking up someone, like a little kid going in to wake up their aunt for like if they're visiting.
So the tractor thing. Okay, I think we do need to explain this, because that doesn't make sense to anyone if they did not know my little brother when we were growing up. Whenever my aunts would come out to visit, my brother would be extremely excited to wake them up as early as possible because he wanted to play with them and have fun. And it was especially around Christmas when he wanted to go open presents. So he would come into their room, he'd crawl up onto the bed, and then he'd just start crawling across anything that was in his way, or anyone. He'd just go, tractor, crawling over you. And he'd also do that to me when I wanted to sleep in on Christmas morning or whatever as well. But yeah, it kind of became a thing. So yeah, Kizzy's got some of that energy.
Absolutely.
And, Ashby, of course, he goes through a full spectrum of emotions in reaction to this. First, annoyance for being woken up early. Second, oh,
sure,
my girlfriend's here. And then, oh crap, I can't talk about who we are in front of her crew.
And none of my crew was allowed to either, Kizzy.
And yeah, then he's like, well, I gotta get cleaned up. I gotta
not look like an idiot.
Gotta make sure that I'm presentable.
Yeah. The thing that this is setting up, though, is that contrast between how Pay and her crew handle violence and Ashby and his crew have handled violence. But also, when the shoe's on the other foot, Pay is not terribly excited over the fact that Ashby was hurt and now is gaining a little bit of empathy for how worried Ashby is every time that they say goodbye.
She also gives Ashby a little bit of a dose of his own medicine and explains, well, now you understand also why I don't necessarily like to share everything that happens with me because I don't want you to worry.
Exactly.
It's a mutual empathy exchange there.
It's not a "I told you so." It's more of a "Hey, I don't like worrying you."
And I don't like being worried for you.
Right.
It's they both appreciate it. And they're also well aware that because of Eluan society and specifically the fact that, Pei has with her some fairly conservative soldiers who could potentially make her life difficult if her relationship with Ashby were to come out to them. They have to be incredibly guarded about how they talk about one another or to one another.
Oh, look, it's a parallel to being stuffed in the closet.
We're just good friends.
TM. Happy Pride Month, everybody.
She says, "Oh, we met up in a bar and found that we enjoyed one another's company, and we occasionally meet for drinks just to catch up."
Amongst other things. Anyway, I think that that's probably a great place to stop discussing the book and move on to more discussions of the characters inside the book.
Let's talk about our Phronimos. So, we've got a couple candidates here, I think. So I think Jenks makes a good candidate. His discussion about, identity and how you can sometimes feel like the name you're born with is not necessarily your truest expression,
More trans allegory.
or the body that you're born with is not your truest expression. But I think we really got to give it again to Dr. Chef. Like, just consistently, he is the wisest member of the Wayfarer crew. He's the person that people turn to for lived experience. He's the person that people turn to for understanding and healing. Dr. Chef is a model of practical wisdom because he has learned his lessons the hard way through a life experience that he would not wish on anyone else. And all of his wisdom is tested by unimaginable hardships. So when he sits and talks with Rosemary, this specific chapter is, in my mind, the heart of the book. It is what helps us to understand Rosemary's struggles. It's what helps us to understand what it means to have the capacity to hurt people. And, how does that make us as people? He talks about how Ashby feels the same sorts of guilt for sometimes having a protective impulse or for imagining what it would be like to have a weapon in hand so that he could protect his crew. Ashby feels guilt for the fact that he thinks that it would feel good. But that doesn't mean that Ashby makes a different choice as a result. Those feelings, those impulses, those urges aren't what make us good or bad people. It's the choices that we make. And Dr. Chef really emphasizes that. Like, you have the capacity for great good and the capacity for great evil. That's the sentient condition. That's all of us. None of us is born a saint. None of us is born a devil. We're just people, and we've got choices in front of us. And some of those choices are more constrained than others by circumstance, by physics, what have you. All you're left with is the choices about how you're going to spend your time, what you're going to do with your energies, how you're going to approach other people, how you're going to solve problems. What is the way that you're going to look for a solution for something? The fact that Rosemary is aware of her capacity to harm, that she's aware of her privilege, that she's aware that there are right and wrong choices that she can make. The fact that she is not trying to justify her decisions. She's not trying to justify her father's decisions. And the fact that she's trying to do everything she can to separate herself from those decisions is what defines her as actually being a good person. She wasn't born evil. She was born like everybody else to a parent. She was born into a family. She didn't get to choose any of those. She didn't get to choose who she was raised with. She didn't get to choose the values with which she was raised. She didn't get to choose any of that. But I think it's noteworthy that as soon as she recognized her choices, she expressed curiosity in spite of her fears. And so Dr. Chef reminds her that, hey, you've made choices. And as soon as you had the opportunity to make choices, you moved as far away from the choices of your past as you could. As soon as you had that knowledge, you had the responsibility, and you used it. You used it the way you should. And I think it's that reminder. We can't beat ourselves up for how we grew up, but we can make choices about what we do next. And it's those choices that are what will yield fruit down the line. So, yeah, I think Dr. Chef is where I got to go. Like, I think we could all use a Dr. Chef in our lives. And I think we all have the opportunity to be a Dr. Chef for somebody else.
I like it. I think that that's a really good choice.
Thank you. So it's your turn for Thing of the Week. What'd you pick?
Okay, so we haven't really recorded in like a month. And in that time, Murderbot came out on Apple TV.
It's a lot of fun.
It is a lot of fun. So I'm going to be honest here. I tried to read All Systems Red, which is the first Murderbot novella, when I was not doing so hot on actually devouring books. And so I didn't enjoy it. I tried. It didn't resonate. Something didn't work. Whatever. Recently went back and re-listened to it, as I think it's actually free on Audible right now. Either that or we already had it. I don't know. But yeah, it's as good as everybody. Like, so many people are recommending it right now. There's probably reasons that they're recommending the book on the fantasy and the sci-fi and the queer sci-fi and all of the other places that I follow on Reddit, is because it's gotten new life breathed into it because it was made into a TV show on Apple TV. Short episodes, comes out every week. That's my only maybe gripe, is because I would love to be able to just binge it. So maybe wait till it's all available. But my hesitance towards it was that Murderbot, like the character, a lot of headcanon is very non-binary coded. And I'm going to remind people that non-binary people can look however non-binary people look. There isn't a set way to look non-binary. There isn't a set of body parts to be non-binary. And yeah, the person playing Murderbot is an attractive dude who looks very masculine, but they do a very good job of reminding each other in the world and those of us who are watching that Murderbot's pronouns are it's, that it is not a man, that it is an it, but not in a way that is erasing its personhood. Because the crew that it is on, that it is protecting, is actually doing their best to give it humanity and recognize its personhood, its autonomy, its rights to control over its own decisions and choices. Also, the crew is extremely queer and poly. Like, this is a very poly-friendly thing. This is a very queer-friendly thing. This is a very autism-coded thing. And I love it. It's also sci-fi, which is kind of just like my jam. It's funny. It's got some absurdist humor in it. It's also quite gentle.
Especially given the name.
Yes.
What's really kind of funny is, so it ties back in a little bit to our discussion about choice. So the character Murderbot, it's a security unit. It's governed by a governing module that controls what it is supposed to do. And while the governor module is in place, it can only follow direct commands. And if someone gives it a direct order, it is compelled to follow it,
even if it would hurt it.
And the whole story kicks off after Murderbot succeeds in hacking that governor module and granting itself free will.
And then what its choices would be, because it could choose to just kill everything, and it doesn't.
Hence why it calls itself Murderbot.
Yes.
How it uses its freedom is mostly to sit around and watch streaming shows.
Much like a lot of us.
I can do anything I want, which means I'm going to sit at home and play video games.
Exactly. It's an interesting look at free will. It's also an interesting look at the judgmental nature of humans. And honestly, like, so a lot of fandom subreddits are icky to be in, but I would say that the Murderbot one is actually pretty good to be in because it's a whole bunch of people saying how much they appreciate how autism coded it is, how queer coded it is, how poly friendly it is, how like instead of a whole bunch of people just whining about the representation, it's a whole lot of people that are celebrating the representation. And I'm a person who had to get out of all of the Last of Us subreddits because they just made me want to throw up because of how toxic all the discussions about the lead actresses and non-binary actor are in that discussion, and then like how they attacked the actor who does have an autism diagnosis and is open about it. I just all of this stuff that was just like, okay, let's just light a match and leave it to burn on the way out. Let's explode this on the way out so we don't have to actually deal with it ever again.
It's one of those things that makes you want to remind yourself that there are some people for whom they figure that if they can loudly repeat a inflammatory opinion often enough, people will mistake it for ubiquity.
Right. But Murderbot's subreddit, way better.
At least for now.
At least for now. But it's also just, for the most part, like the community that is grown up around the books and the community that enjoys this new series all seem to be very much in line with the spirit of the story.
Yeah, like all of the characters in it have their little
Quirks.
foibles and quirks. Yeah. Like they're not by any means perfect characters or perfect people. They get in their own way a lot of times.
Yeah. And I'd also like to point out that they are a lot more capable than Murderbot would like you to believe.
And generally speaking, I think you look at them mostly as like they're not strictly caricatures, but they do have humorous elements to them.
Yes. And I think that those humorous elements get played up by the way that we are meant to kind of be in this snarky robot head that no one else gets to hear all of the commentary, but we get to hear the commentary. And ultimately, I'd say check it out. If you like what we have going on here, like I think that you would probably enjoy Murderbot. And if nothing else, read it.
It's definitely some good quick reads. Well, with that, let's go ahead and move into our 7 words. So I have words from the book this week, and I think I had to just go with, what the fork is the problem here? Just, Jenks's matter of fact, look, you didn't do it. You didn't help out with doing it. And as soon as you knew about it, you left. So what's the problem here?
Yeah.
Why are you beating yourself up, kid?
Talking to Rosemary.
And I just thought it was fun. And it was 7 words, so it worked.
I think that's perfect.
Sometimes simple is best.
Sometimes simple is best.
How about you? You had words from life. What'd you pick?
Well, as if this particular episode wasn't queer and or trans enough. So we went to a toy store on Saturday morning because I wanted more fidgets, because I just enjoy having little things. I've been playing with a fidget this whole time that we've been recording. And there was a specific color of Tangle, which is kind of my favorite fidget of all time. Tangle Juniors, wonderful things. I could totally recommend them. I have a table full of them pretty much, and I've given them to a whole ton of people. So first time at this particular toy store, we also picked up for our little niecelet. And they have like the rewards program because of course they do. Everything has a rewards program. And they asked my name and I said, my name is Phoenix. And they said, oh, I love that name. It's really lovely. And I'm like, why, thank you. I chose it myself because that's my standard way of replying when someone compliments my name. I heard that joke from somebody else. I don't know where it was anymore. I definitely have stolen that. But honestly, I think that names are things that are given, but should not be so precious that they can't be changed. Especially if they're given by someone who the memory every time you're called your name just brings up pain, which is the case for my dead name, is that it just calls to mind the person who gave it to me, and I don't like that. But also, like, once you choose a new name, it's okay if you want to choose another new name later. You can change it. It's okay. There are some complications about changing it legally, but what people call you doesn't necessarily have to match what is on documentation.
It's true.
But it was very nice, and I love that I was complimented for my name. I really like being called Phoenix. I mean, I have 3 of them tattooed on me. I really resonate with it, and I was very happy to be complimented for it.
Oh, that's a good pick.
I also was wearing a shirt with a phoenix on it in the middle of a forest fire, and it just says, oops. And that was also commented on. Oh, hence the shirt. And I'm like, a little bit.
And with that, I'd like to thank you for potting with me.
Thank you for potting with me.
And thanks for listening to Tales from the Waystone. Join us next time as we continue the summer reading program with pages 246 through 312 of The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet.
We would like to thank our friend Shawnee Jang for our theme music.
And many thanks to Becky Chambers for creating the universe that we've enjoyed exploring.
Audio production and editing courtesy of me, Phoenix McCullough.
And writing and project management courtesy of me, Will McCullough.
If you would like to help support us and have the means to do so, please consider becoming a patron on our Patreon page, patreon.com/waystonepod, where you can listen to our Equinox and Solstice pods. A new one should be coming soon, or just did. I don't know what day this releases. Anyway, we will soon be starting our next series on that, which is to cover the graphic novels for Paper Girls.
Looking forward to it.
I am too. But our last one of this particular series of reading through I Hate Fairyland, the last book of that is coming out on, I think the solstice is the 20th of June.
Something like that, maybe the 22nd.
Maybe, but I think I looked it up and it's the 20th.
Okay.
I might be wrong. Anyway, regardless of all of that, if you would just like to chat with us, come join us on our Discord. Link in the description. Anyway, with that, here's to one more day above the roses.
To one more day above the roses.
Ding! Let me prepare the reading.